What happens when enemy soldiers are captured and sent to a place so big and empty that escape is impossible? This is the true story of German submarine sailors who learned that the biggest prison isn't made of bars. It's made of endless forests, frozen lakes, and a kindness they never expected. November 12, 1943, 2:14 in the morning, the North Atlantic Ocean. The air inside submarine U-537 is thick with the smell of diesel fuel, dirty bodies, and fear. The sonar operator, Fenrik Eel, rips his headphones off. His face is pale in the red glow of the control room.
Sonar contact! Close!
Starboard side. Captain Lieutenant Peter Shrew grips the periscope handles. Be silent. Flood the tanks. Take us down to 200 meters. Fast. The submarine tilts down. It's like a cramped steel coffin going down into the crushing black water. Then it comes. The high, pitched metallic ping, ping, ping of the hunter above them. Chief Petty Officer Karl Hoffman grips a valve wheel and begins to sweat. He is 24 years old and has been on 3 submarine trips. But this sound always makes his blood run cold. The ping is like an invisible finger pointing right at them. They are right on top of us. Captain, the sonar man whispers. The first explosion is a loud, wet boom that slams the submarine sideways. Lights shatter. Cork pieces rain down. A new sound comes, the screaming of bending metal. Crunch! Another bomb. Closer. The submarine groans like a dying animal. Water sprays from a broken pipe in the engine room.
Depth 220 meters!
The chief engineer screams. The back torpedo room is flooding. We can't hold her. Shrew is calm, but his knuckles are white. They have us. We are too deep, too damaged. Go up! Go up! Blow all tanks. The submarine lurches upward in an emergency rise. The crew holds on to anything solid, as the boat rockets toward the surface like a wounded whale desperate for air. Karl Hoffman gets ready for the gunfire he knows will come. The hatch flies open. Karl climbs up the ladder behind his captain and bursts onto the slippery deck. The air is freezing and tastes like salt and gunpowder. And then the light. A blinding white beam pins them from the darkness. It's coming from the high, steel, gray wall of a destroyer ship bearing down on them. A voice made louder by a bullhorn cuts through the wind. It's in English. Do not try to sink your ship. Leave your boat. I say again, leave your boat. We are getting ready to fire. Karl looks at his captain, who simply raises his hands. The fight is over. He slides into the black, churning water. The cold hits him like a punch, stealing his breath. A rope is thrown. He is pulled, gasping and shivering, onto the deck of the destroyer. He sees the ship's name painted on a life ring, HMCS St. Laurent. A Canadian sailor, built like a lumberjack, shoves a rough blanket into his chest. Get below. Now, there is no rifle hit to the face. No spit. No angry kick. Karl and his surviving crew members are herded into a warm eating area where they fall down in shock, dripping seawater onto the floor. A medic checks them for wounds. It is quick and businesslike. This is the first shock to their minds. They were warriors of the Reich, the wolves of the sea. They were ready for a hateful, revenge-filled enemy. They were not ready for this cold, almost bored professionalism. Days later, they land at Halifax, Nova Scotia, a big gray port filled with warships. They are marched, along with thousands of others, into a processing station. Karl is amazed by the variety of uniforms. He sees the sun, faded uniforms of the German Africa Corps captured in Tunisia. He sees paratroopers from Sicily. He sees Air Force ground crews from France. They are a broken army, all funneled to this strange new continent. Here they meet their guards, the Veterans Guard of Canada. Karl watches them, confused. These are not the tough soldiers he was told defended the Allied homelands. These are old men. Their faces are lined. Their hair is gray. Many wear ribbons from a war Karl only read about in books, Vimy, Passchendaele 1918. They walk with limps. They smoke pipes. A German army captain. Stiff, backed and proud even in his torn uniform, clicks his heels and demands to speak to the camp commander, a tough-looking Canadian sergeant, who looks to be at least 60 chews on his pipe stem and looks the captain up and down. That's Major Pelletier. Sir, the sergeant says, his voice rough. And he'll see you when he's ready. Until then, you'll stand here with the rest. The captain sputters.
I am a German officer.
I demand. And I. The sergeant interrupts. His voice never rising, Hom Sergeant Frank McBride. And I demand you shut your mouth. You're not in France anymore, son. You're in Nova Scotia now. Form up in lines of 3. The politeness is a weapon. It takes away their power. The prisoners are ready for cruelty, which would prove their Nazi propaganda right. Instead, they are met with rules, with order, calm, and unshakable authority. It is deeply unsettling. They are marched to a train station. Karl expects cattle cars. They are, after all, prisoners, the enemy. Instead, they are loaded onto old, but working passenger trains with wooden benches, a pot-bellied stove in the center, and windows. They are given food for the journey, cans of corned beef, hard biscuits, and a large metal drum of hot, sweet tea. A guard from the Veterans Guard moves down the aisle, handing 2 cigarettes to each German soldier. Don't smoke them all at once. Boys, he says with a thin smile. It's a long trip. The train jerks and begins to move. Karl presses his face to the dirty glass, watching the gray city of Halifax disappear. He's moving west. He knows nothing of this country. In his mind, Canada is made up, a big frozen wasteland attached to America. He and the other prisoners, men who had conquered Europe, think they will be in a new city by nightfall. The train picks up speed. Karl watches the landscape begin to change. The few coastal towns give way to trees, just trees. A thick, endless forest of pine and spruce stretching from the tracks to the horizon. Hours pass. The sun shifts. The train clatters on. Karl looks out the window. Trees. He dozes off, his head rattling against the wooden wall. He wakes hours later. The sun is setting. He looks out the window. There is nothing. Nothing but trees and rocks and lakes. An endless, empty, magnificent, and terrifying wilderness. A soldier from the Africa Corps, a young man named Gunter, stares out the same window, his eyes wide. Where are the cities? He whispers. Karl looks at him. Where are the farms? Where are the people? The train whistles. A lonely, sad sound that echoes and dies in the big, dark emptiness. The realization is just beginning to dawn on them. They are not just being put in prison. They are being swallowed. The train ride becomes like time has stopped working. 1 day passes, then 2. They cross from Nova Scotia through New Brunswick and into the hugeness of Quebec. The German captain tries to keep order, ordering his section to do exercises in the aisle. The Canadian guards, Sergeant McBride among them, simply watch, sipping their own tea, their faces showing nothing. They don't stop them. They don't need to. The train is a sealed world rolling through emptiness. By the 3rd day, the prisoners' conversations have faded. The pride is gone, replaced by a quiet, confused silence. They are deep in Ontario. a province Karl Hoffman has never heard of, but which seems impossibly to be larger than Germany itself. This is a trick. A young Air Force pilot mutters to Karl, his face pressed to the glass. They are driving us in circles. No country can be this nothing. Karl shakes his head. The sun is steady hands. We are still moving west. Look, he points. The land hasn't just been trees for a day. It has changed. Now it is a brutal, alien world of black rock, sharp cliffs, and small, wind-blasted pine trees. The Canadian Shield. There are no farms. Gunter, the Africa Corps man, says, his voice hollow. He is used to the desert, but that was a desert of sand. This is a desert of stone and water. Nothing can live here. Where are they taking us? The train passes a lake. An hour later, it passes another, and another. These are not lakes. They are inland seas of cold, dark water stretching to their own horizons. The sheer, raw emptiness of the land begins to feel like an active, hostile force. In Europe, escape was about finding people, towns, and borders. Here, Karl realizes the very idea of escape is a joke. Escape to where? Sergeant McBride walks down the aisle, checking the stove. The captain, desperate to have control, stands.
Sergeant, we demand to know where we're going. This is against the Geneva Convention. We are being taken to nowhere.
McBride finishes tapping his pipe and looks at the German officer. He seems, for the first time, almost amused. Against the rules. He chuckles, a dry, rasping sound. Son, you're not even in northern Ontario yet. You've got another day to go. He unfolds a simple paper map from his pocket and flattens it on his knee. The Germans crowd the easel to look. McBride points with his pipe stem. We started here. Halifax. His finger moves a tiny bit across the map. We're about here. He points to the huge blank white space that covers the rest of the map. And we're taking you here. His finger lands on a tiny, unimportant dot on the northernmost shore of Lake Superior, next to a town called Neys. The captain's face drains of color. The map shows their journey so far has been just a crawl from the eastern edge. They are like insects being carried across a continent. The polite guard hasn't just answered his question. He has, with a simple piece of paper, completely torn apart the officer's view of the world. The prisoners return to their seats. The blow to their minds is more effective than a beating. They are, for the first time, truly tiny and unimportant. On the fourth day, the train finally slows, its brakes screeching in the huge silence.
Right, lads. End of the line.
Everybody out. Karl Hoffman steps down from the train, his legs stiff. The air is different here. It's so clean and cold it stings his lungs. And the sound, there is none. Only the wind whistling through the pines and a low, distant roar. He looks around. There is no station. There is no town. There is only a rough wooden platform, a side track, and a muddy path leading into the forest. In the distance, he sees it. Camp 100 Neys. It is brand new. The raw yellow cuts of fresh lumber stand out against the dark green of the forest. Rows of wooden barracks, a cookhouse, and a hospital, all surrounded by two huge fences of barbed wire with wooden guard towers at each corner. It is a prison like 100 others they have seen or heard of. But the setting is what breaks them. Behind the camp, the forest looms like a solid, 1,000-foot high green wall. It is not the managed, civilized forest of the Black Forest in Germany. It is a tangled, ancient mass of spruce, birch, and rock. And in front of the camp, through a break in the trees, Karl sees the source of the roar. He walks, mesmerized. With the other prisoners as they are herded toward the gate, he sees Lake Superior. It is not a lake. It is an ocean, a freshwater sea of churning gray, deadly cold water that disappears into a horizon as flat and absolute as the Atlantic Ocean. A young tank soldier drops his small bundle. Another ocean, he whispers, his voice breaking. We cross the ocean to get to another ocean. They are marched through the gates. The guards of the veterans guard motion them into lines. The camp commander, a tall, thin major with the same old 1918 ribbons as his men, stands on the steps of the mess hall. Welcome to Neys, gentlemen, he says, his voice carrying easily in the clear air. He speaks understandable, formal German. You are prisoners of war under the authority of His Majesty King George VI. You will be treated in strict agreement with the Geneva Convention. You will work. You will be fed. You will be housed. He pauses and looks past them, out toward the impossible forest, and then to the deadly stretch of the lake. Why have rules here? The major continues. But I advise you to look around. You will find that He points to his elderly guards, who stand relaxed with rifles slung over their shoulders, are not your main jailers. This, he sweeps his arm at the wilderness, was your prison. There are no towns for 300 kilometers. There are no farms. There is only rock, water, and flies. Trying to escape is not brave. It is suicide. We will not hunt you. We will simply collect your bodies in the spring. The speech is given not as a threat, but as a simple, polite statement of fact. Karl Hoffman is assigned to Hut 27. He sits on his bed, a wooden frame with a straw-filled mattress, and stares at the newly cut pine of the wall. The propaganda had told them of the subhuman, brutal Canadians. Instead, they were being guarded by polite, aging fathers who treated them not with hate, but with a kind of tired pity. The propaganda had told them they were conquering the world. Instead, they had been shipped to a place that the world had forgotten. A place where the land itself, in its huge, silent indifference, was the true prison. The war, the rage, the her, it all felt impossibly far away. The days at Camp 100, Neys, settle into a routine that is both ordinary and deeply weird. The first, most shocking thing is the food. Gunter, the Africa Corps veteran, cries openly on the first morning. Karl Hoffman finds him in the mess hall, staring at his plate. Look, Gunter whispers, his voice thick. Karl looks. On the metal tray are 2 thick slices of white bread, a big smear of real butter, a shining square of raspberry jam, 2 fried eggs, 3 strips of bacon, and a steaming mug of dark, sweet coffee. It is more than my wife has seen in a year. Gunter says, horrified. They are mocking us. But it is not mockery. It is simply the food ration. They are fed better than they had been as front-line soldiers in the German army. They are fed better, they know, than their own families back in Balm, destroyed Germany. This generosity is more damaging to their minds than a ration of stale bread and thin soup would be. Cruelty they could understand. It was the currency of war. But kindness, plenty, it is a confusing, undermining weapon. They are given work clothes, heavy wool pants, flannel shirts, and tough leather boots. All made in Canada, all warm. They are organized into work groups under the terms of the convention. As soldiers of certain ranks, Karl and his comrades are not required to work. But the camp commander has a simple, polite policy. Gentlemen, Major Pelletier addresses them. You are correct. Your rank excuses you from work. You are free to stay in your barracks. He lets the silence hang. However, only those who volunteer for work will get the full workers' food ration. That includes the cigarettes, the jam, the chocolate, and the extra bread. Those who choose not to work will get the basic ration, as required by the convention. He doesn't need to say more. The basic ration is survival. The workers' ration is comfort. The next day, Karl Hoffman, along with 90% of the other soldiers, volunteers to work. Their job is as huge and impossible to understand as the landscape itself, cutting pulpwood. They are marched out of the wire every morning under the relaxed, almost sleepy watch of the veterans' guard. The old soldiers don't march them at gunpoint. They simply walk with them, rifles slung, smoking their pipes. The prisoners are handed axes and two man-crosscut saws known as misery whips. Their task is to attack the endless, silent forest. Whack! 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 The sound of axes echoes in the cold, clear air. Karl, a submarine mechanic, is clumsy at first. His hands, used to delicate valve work and greasy machinery, are soft. Within an hour they are raw. Within a day they are blistered and bleeding. He works alongside a paratrooper named Eric, a man who had jumped into Crete. They stare at a single towering spruce. In this country, Eric grunts, spitting on his hands. Even the trees are proud. They pull the crosscut saw back and forth. Zing, shush. Zing, shush. The smell of pine resin is sharp, like medicine. Sergeant McBride, their guard for the day, sits on a stump 20 yards away, cleaning his pipe with a pocket knife. He watches them, but not like a hawk. He watches them like a farmer watches his cattle. A detached ownership presence. The captain, the proud officer from the train, refuses to work. He spends his days walking the camp, a lonely, angry figure, slowly starving on his pride as he watches the workers return with their extra food. The guard's politeness is a constant source of confusion. One afternoon, Karl's axe head, poorly wedged, flies off the handle and sails into a deep snow drift. He freezes. In the German army, losing or breaking equipment meant a severe scolding, perhaps a formal charge. He approaches Sergeant McBride, his heart pounding, standing at attention. Sergeant. Private Hoffman reporting. I have lost the head of my axe. McBride looks up slowly, squinting. Lost it. Where? In the snow, sir. Over there. I cannot find it. McBride sighs, not in anger, but in simple, tired frustration. Right. Well, you can't bloody well cut wood without it, can you? He stands up, knocking his pipe against his heel. Show me where. For 10 minutes. The two of them, the Canadian guard and the German prisoner, search through the snow, poking with sticks, until McBride's boot hits something hard. He reaches down and pulls up the steel axe head. There now, he says, handing it to Karl. You take this back to the tool shed. Get Corporal Dubois to put it back on, and try not to throw it at a moose next time, Karl is stunned. That is all. Yes, Sergeant. McBride looks at him, baffled. What else is there? Go on, get. Karl retreats, his mind spinning, no shouting. No punishment. Just a problem stated and solved. This lack of clear hostility is maddening. It gives them nothing to push against, nothing to hate. The guards treat them not as monsters, but as a combination of dangerous children and inconvenient long-term employees. The prisoners, in turn, begin to change. The rigid German army discipline, which the captain tries so desperately to enforce, begins to break down. What is the point of a sharp salute or polished boots when your guard is a 60-year-old man who calls you son and is more concerned with his pipe tobacco than your beliefs. They begin to build, not just cut. With the Canadians' unspoken permission, they construct a small theater, a sports field, even a complex multi-level baking oven. They form an orchestra. They put on plays by Schiller and Goethe. They are creating a miniature Germany in the middle of a huge, uncaring void. But the void is always there. One evening, Karl stands at the barbed wire fence, looking out. The sun is setting over Lake Superior, turning the ice-choked water into a sea of liquid fire. It is the most beautiful and the most terrifying thing he has ever seen. The sheer size of it. Back home, Germany was a land of borders, of history, of people. Every square meter was known, farmed, or fought over. This was creation itself, untouched, unblemished, and utterly indifferent to him, to his war, to his entire continent. He thinks of escape. He pictures himself walking into that forest. He would be dead in 2 days, eaten by black flies, lost in 1,000 square kilometers of identical trees, or frozen solid. He turns and looks at the guard tower. The old veteran inside is not even looking at him. He is reading a newspaper. Karl realizes the major was right. The barbed wire isn't there to keep them in. It's there to keep the wilderness out. The guards are not their jailers. They are their protectors. This realization is the final crushing blow to their minds. He's not a prisoner of war. He is a refugee, saved from the war and kept safe from the world by a polite old man with a rifle. February 9th, 1944, 700 a.m. Camp 100 Neys. The world is gone. Karl Hoffman steps out of Hut 27 into air that feels like pure, sharp crystal. It is 42 degrees below zero. The air is so cold it doesn't feel like air. It is a physical, scraping substance. To breathe it in too quickly is to feel 1,000 tiny needles drive into his lungs. The sound of the wake up bugle cracks and shatters in the stillness. The entire camp is buried. Snow is piled in drifts higher than the barracks, forming weird white canyons. The paths have been dug out, but the camp itself feels underground. The sky is a pale, merciless blue. Lake Superior, now a huge frozen plate of white pressure ridges, groans and booms in the distance. A deep, echoing thump as the ice shifts. A sound like artillery from a frozen god. This is the true jailer. Inside the mess hall, the air is thick with the fog of hot coffee, frying pork, and wet wool. The prisoners huddle, their faces ruddy, their conversations quiet. A young tank soldier, a new arrival from the failed defense of Italy, is rocking back and forth, his hands wrapped around his mug. "We will die here," he mutters, his eyes wide with a terror Karl recognizes. They brought us here to freeze. This is their plan. Sergeant McBride, making his morning rounds, overhears him. He stops, not to punish but to correct as one would a child. "Nonsense, son," McBride says, his voice perfectly reasonable. He points to the pot, bellied stove in the corner, glowing a dull red. "You've got 3/4 of a cord of birch stacked outside your hut. You've got long underwear. You've got 4,000 calories on that plate. You're better off than I am. My wife's furnace in Aurelia is broken." He claps the kid on the shoulder. "Eat your eggs. Work keeps you warm." The young soldier stares, speechless. The guard has not only dismissed his fear of dying, but has complained about his own home problems. The work has, impossibly, continued. The prisoners are now dragging the logs they've cut, pulling them with draft horses, provided by the Canadian Army. down to the frozen lake to be floated to the pulp mill in the spring. Karl, now hardened and muscular, his hands tough like wood, has become an expert woodsman. He finds he enjoys it, the physical tiredness, the clear result of a day's work, the silence. The captain does not. Lieutenant Colonel Hansfurtle is a ghost. He still refuses to work, clinging to the remains of his rank. But the Canadian commander has held to his polite rule. Furtle gets the basic ration. He is thin. His uniform hangs on him. He is always cold. He comes out of his hut, his face blue, his greatcoat wrapped tight. He sees Karl and his team getting the horses ready. Hoffman. Furtle barks, his voice thin in the huge cold. Your posture is bad. You are a disgrace to the Navy. You will stand aside! Lieutenant Colonel. Karl says, not unkindly. He doesn't even salute. You are in the way of the harness. Furtle's eyes go wide. It is the ultimate act of disobedience. But he has no way to respond. He cannot send Karl to jail. Only the Canadians can do that. He cannot reduce his food. He cannot assign him bathroom duty. He has no power here. The old structures of the German army have been frozen, shattered, and blown away by the Ontario winter. The new order is simple. There are the Canadians, who have the food and the warmth, and there are the prisoners, who must earn it. Furtle turns, his face a mask of powerless rage, and retreats to his cold, empty hut. He's no longer a leader. He's just a man who is hungry. The guards observe all of this with quiet detachment. They run the camp not as a military prison, but as a remote lumber company. One afternoon, Eric the paratrooper misjudges a swing. The axe skips off a knot on a frozen log and bites deep into his own boot. He screams. A raw, terrifying sound in the silent forest. Karl and the others pack the wound with snow, making a tourniquet from a torn shirt. They carry him back to the wire. The guard in the tower, an old corporal named Smokey, sees them coming. He doesn't aim his rifle. He climbs down, unlatches the gate, and runs to help them carry Eric. Gaddammit, Smokey mutters, seeing the blood-soaked boot. That's the third one this month. You boys got to be more careful. That ice makes the steel bounce. He's not angry. He is annoyed. It is a work accident. It creates paperwork. Eric is taken to the camp hospital, which is cleaner and better stocked than the field station he'd seen in Sicily. The Canadian doctor, a captain, saves his foot. He spends the next 2 months recovering, reading and learning English from a nurse. The war, meanwhile, has become a ghost story. In June 1944, the camp gets newspapers.
The headlines are huge. Ein VSIO.
LNIS Landine and Normandy Y. Carl Gunter. And the others huddle around the paper in the mess hall. They read the names of French towns they had occupied. Now rubble. They see the lists of captured German divisions. There is no cheering, no Hail Hitler. Only a deep, heavy silence. They are dying. Gunter whispers, his face gray. He is staring at a photo of a destroyed tank near Caen. All of them. They're all dying. Karl looks out the window, past the wire to the green, uncaring forest, now teeming with summer life. The war is on another planet. The battles, the blood, the FU-her. It all feels like a faint fever dream. Here. The only enemies are the blackflies and the mosquitoes. Here, the only goal is to stack the day's quota of wood to earn the ration. To get a seat at the orchestra's performance of Beethoven. A new batch of prisoners arrives in late 1944. These are not the professionals of 1942 and 1943. They are hollow-eyed, fanatical boys from the Hitler Youth and old, terrified men from the People's Army. They try to force the Nazi salute. They call Karl and the others traitors for their casual working relationship with the guards. "You are collaborators," one 17-year-old SS soldier screams at Karl.
"You fraternize with the enemy?"
Karl, who now weighs 20 pounds more than when he was captured, who has muscles he never knew he had, simply looks at the boy. The enemy, Karl says, gave me this apple. He takes a bite. They gave me this wool blanket. The enemy, boy, is the only reason you will survive the winter. The boy is speechless. His fanaticism has no grip here. It cannot compete with a full stomach and the crushing, silent, unpolitical presence of the Canadian Shield. The politeness of the guards, combined with the tyranny of the geography, has done what no bombing campaign could. It hasn't just defeated them. It has erased them. It has made their entire identity as Herrenvolk, as soldiers of the Reich utterly, politely, and permanently absurd. May 8, 1945, 1100 a.m. Camp 100 Neys. The sound of the great unraveling has haunted the camp for weeks. It is the sound of spring on Lake Superior, a noise of pistol, shot cracks, deep groaning booms, and the sound of continents of ice grinding against the shore. The lake is breaking up. A whistle blows, not for the work group. Full assembly. The prisoners file out onto the muddy parade ground, blinking in the bright, watery sunlight. The smell is of damp earth, thawing pine needles, and the huge cold water. Major Pelletier, the commander, stands on the steps of the main hall. He is not surrounded by armed guards. He is just there, holding a single sheet of paper. The camp falls silent. Even the SS fanatics, the blacks, as they're known, seem to sense the seriousness. Pelletier waits, letting the silence stretch, broken only by the drip of water from the eaves. "Gentlemen," he begins, his voice flat, empty of triumph. "I have an announcement from Allied Supreme Command." He raises the paper. A's of 11:01 p.m. Central European Time, May 7th. All forces of the German High Command have surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe is over. The silence that follows is not human. It is the silence of the wilderness itself. A huge, crushing vacuum. Karl Hoffman stands frozen. He feels the light spring breeze on his face. He hears a single woodpecker hammering at a tree just outside the wire. The war is over. The words don't make sense. The war was the world. It was the axis on which his entire life had turned. Here, in this place, it had become a distant radio signal. Now that signal had been switched off. A single shrill voice shatters the quiet. It is the 17-year-old SS soldier from the last batch. His face is a mask of white, fanatical rage. His eyes streaming tears.
"Lies!" He screams, his voice cracking. "Lies! It is a trick! The FU hair lives! The wonder weapons are coming! You are liars!"
He lunges, not at a guard but at Gunter, the Africa Corps veteran standing next to him. "Traitor!" You believe this. Before he can take 2 steps, Sergeant McBride, who had been leaning against a post, moves with a speed that surprises everyone for his age. He doesn't draw his weapon. He simply grabs the boy by the front of his tunic, lifting him half off the ground. McBride's face is inches from the boy's. His voice is not a shout. It is a low, cold growl. The war, he hisses, is over. You lost. Your FU Herr put a bullet in his own head in a bunker in Berlin. Your 1,000-year Reich is a pile of bricks. He shoves the boy, who stumbles and falls into the mud, sobbing. McBride looks up at the rest of the prisoners, his eyes sweeping over them. Anyone else? No one moves. The captain, Hannens Fertile, stares at his boots, his face hollow. His pride, his rank, his entire purpose. All of it had been built on a foundation that was now officially gone. He is just a cold, hungry man in a tattered uniform in the middle of a Canadian forest. Pelletier lets the scene play out, then clears his throat. You are no longer prisoners of war. He continues, as if nothing had happened. You are now classified as surrendered enemy personnel. You will remain in this facility pending repatriation. He folds the paper. The whistle for the midday meal will blow in 10 minutes. Dismissed. And that is it. There is no celebration from the Canadians. No taunting. No triumphant hoisting of a flag. The war did not end with a bang. It ended with a polite announcement followed by the promise of lunch. Karl walks back to Hut 27 in a daze. Gunter walks beside him, his shoulders slumped. It is finished, Gunter whispers. He pulls a worn photo from his breast pocket. It is of his wife and 2 small children, standing in front of a church in Dresden. Are they still there, Karl? Is Dresden still there? Karl has no answer. He realizes with a cold dread that his own polite, comfortable. Well, Fed imprisonment has been a grotesque mercy. While he was learning to swing an axe and complaining about the cold, his entire country was being incinerated. The news transforms the camp. The hardcore Nazis, perhaps 24 of them, become a sullen, isolated group. They hold their own funerals for the FU marching in the woods, singing songs of the SS. The Canadian Guards watch them and do nothing. Let them sing. Smokey tells Karl as they watch the fanatics file past. So long as they meet their pulp quota, they can yodel to the moon for all I care. This indifference is the final, most profound humiliation. Their fanaticism, their world-changing ideology, is treated as a harmless, slightly odd hobby by their jailers. The work continues. This, perhaps, is the strangest part. But the war is over. Eric, the paratrooper, protests the next morning as the guards hand out the saws. Sergeant McBride sips his tea from a metal mug. That's right, son. So, why are we cutting wood? McBride looks at him as if he's an idiot. Because the contract with the Superior Pulp and Paper Mill doesn't expire until 1946. You're still getting paid, aren't you? You're still eating, aren't you? Well, someone's got to cut the wood. Get to it. Karl shoulders his axe. He walks into the forest. A place that is no longer a prison, but simply his workplace. He is no longer a soldier of the Reich. He is no longer a prisoner of war. He is a lumberjack, a well-fed, well-paid displaced employee of the Canadian government. He stands before a massive white pine. He spits on his hands, grips the axe handle, and swings. The clean THCK echoes in the silent, indifferent forest. He had been captured by an enemy that confused him. He had been imprisoned by a geography that terrified him. And in the end, he had been defeated not by violence but by polite, bureaucratic, overwhelming normalcy. This is the power of a different kind of prison, one built not of walls, but of wilderness, politeness, and unexpected mercy. If this story made you think differently about war, capture, and humanity, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss stories that challenge everything you thought you knew about history. What would you have done in Karl's place? Let us know in the comments below.